did not have that luxury to have a recess, because we had a working recess to consider the budget estimates after we tabled them towards the tail end of the last session, just before that recess. Therefore, a lot of work has been input into the consideration of these inputs, and I must take this opportunity to thank all members who dedicated their time and a lot of their resources into ensuring that we have a report ready for debate. And I've listened to many of the speakers this afternoon, Honorable Speaker, who have contributed to this debate, and I must commend the very detailed analysis that the members who have contributed are analyzing these budget estimates with. When I listened to the member for Magarini mention specific projects in his constituency, the member for Mombasa, Honorable Zamzam, speak to specific issues that touch on the people, then you know we have a budget or budget estimates that are people-centric and that are responding to the needs and aspirations of the people of Kenya. And it's quite commendable, Honorable Speaker. Having said that, Honorable Speaker, we are passing this budget, or rather we are considering these budget estimates at a time that the entire global economy is faced with a lot of uncertainties. 6 months ago, nobody knew there would be a war in the Gulf region. Today, we are living through that war. And as I said the last time we were speaking about the fuel crisis in the country and in the world, we are living in wartime. And therefore, wartime economies can never be similar to peacetime economies. And this uncertainty is likely to go, we do not know, but is likely, in my estimation, to go into the next financial year, because we are yet to see any indications of any respite in the war in the Middle East, or at least the unlocking of the global trade routes, or even opening up of the logistical movement of goods and services, and opening up of trade around the world. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, with this kind of uncertainty, it becomes difficult for us to be able to budget with the certainty that what we are budgeting today will see us through to the end of this financial year, or rather the next financial year. And I'm saying that, Honorable Speaker, to caution us that we are likely, probably in the near future, and I know the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee will bear me witness, we are likely probably in the next financial year to have an earlier supplementary budget than normally we do. Because we will have to realign our budget estimates, our revenue estimates, with the realities that will pertain when we begin the next financial year in July. We remain hopeful that this war will come to an end, but again, because it is not within our control, I just want to caution us that even as we plan today, we must plan with that in mind, that we are dealing in a very uncertain world, and the global economic challenges that pertain around the world, we are not isolated, and we have to live through them. We were just speaking this afternoon about the crisis in this region, the East African region, or the Greater Lakes region and the East African region, touching on the Ebola virus. And that also is a threat to our economy and the regional economy. That will have an implication on our normal trade routes between us and the other East African countries, and therefore will have an impact on our revenues. And therefore, we must all be alive to these things, so that even as we plan and as we think through how we'll roll out the next financial year, Honorable Speaker, we must be aware that these global challenges are there with us. However, Honorable Speaker, we must be thankful to God that the Kenyan economy has remained very resilient. Even amidst all these uncertainties and the global challenges that have been there, we have supported a very stable macroeconomic environment, and sustained investments in key sectors of our economy have ensured that our economy remains resilient and continues to make steady but certain strides in growth. Honorable Speaker, if you think about it, when we began this session, we never knew we would have to reduce our VAT from 16 to 8% on fuel. That reduction of 8% has an implication on the revenue projections that were factored in when we were doing these budget estimates. And although that has since been rectified, Honorable Speaker, I'm only saying this for us to be alive to the fact that there are many things that will come that may affect how we roll out this budget, and therefore we must be prepared that whenever things happen, we must be ready to change as things change, Honorable Speaker. And the budget estimates before this House today, Honorable Speaker, as I said, will demonstrate in a very clear manner the interventions that the government has made in terms of having targeted interventions that strengthen our food security. If you look at some of the interventions that are there, going through these estimates, you see figures that support our food security, about 18 billion shillings going to the fertilizer subsidy program to ensure that we improve access to affordable farm inputs for many of our agricultural neighborhoods. Some 2 billion shillings that is going to the seed subsidy program, again targeted to ensuring that we have increased crop production and food security is guaranteed in our country. Because a country that cannot feed itself, Honorable Speaker, cannot even grow its economy. And therefore, many of the interventions that you see here, as I said, are targeted to ensuring that we have interventions that ensure we have food security, others that are supporting vulnerable segments of our population, the cash transfer program. I have heard Honorable Zamzam and other members speak to the Nyota program and other programs that government is implementing to ensure that we have targeted solutions supporting our vulnerable segments of the population. And also, Honorable Speaker, many of the other targeted interventions that you find in these budget estimates speak to enhancing the domestic revenue mobilization while preserving our fiscal sustainability in a big way. Honorable Speaker, I must take this opportunity at that point to speak to the new Commissioner General of KRA. As I said, since we have all these challenges, the only way, Honorable Speaker, to ensure we do not significantly or in a big way disrupt our budget implementation program is to ensure, one, that we stick to our revenue targets. And that is very well done, Honorable Speaker, by harnessing on technology. And I want to speak to the new Commissioner General of KRA. Please, former Cabinet Secretary Adan Mohamed, do not fall prey to the cartels that have pervaded and taken charge at KRA over the years. Do what you must do to ensure that we leverage on technology to make sure that we are able to mobilize as much as we can in terms of domestic resources, Honorable Speaker. And if you look at the resources that we target to mobilize, Honorable Speaker, this year, you see, Honorable Speaker, we estimate to collect about 3.6 to 9.7 trillion shillings. Or 3.629 trillion. And that is equivalent to only 17.4% of our GDP. Honorable Speaker, if we are not able to mobilize more of our domestic resources as revenue coming into the country, then it will become very difficult to be able to finance this budget and also be able to carry on with all the programs that we have planned to carry out without disrupting other programs, Honorable Speaker, that had been rolled out before. And I was just trying to look through the figures that were there last year, Honorable Speaker. If you look at the figures we had in 2025-2026, we had an 18.4% of revenue against our GDP. Or rather, the revenue versus our GDP was at 18.4%. The next financial year, we are projecting that at about 17.4%. That is a 1% decrease. And that points to the challenges that I'm talking about, the global challenges, Honorable Speaker, in terms of being able to mobilize resources with all the disruptions that come in. At the same time, Honorable Speaker, if you look at our expenditure, the overall expenditures are projected at about 4.785, or 23% of GDP. Therefore, that tells you, Honorable Speaker, you have a deficit of over a trillion shillings. Actually 1.1, almost close to 1.12 trillion shillings in deficit, equivalent to about 5.3% again of GDP. Honorable Speaker, this may be now. We do not know what will happen in the next 2-3 months. The pressure that is there for additional expenditure, Honorable Speaker, is certain. But the revenue is not certain. And I say that, Honorable Speaker, because very soon the Finance Committee is out there listening to members of the public on the finance bill proposals. And everywhere you listen to Kenyans speaking, they tell you we do not want any additional taxes. And I must thank the National Treasury and the Finance Committee because unlike what was being propagated by those who propagate a lot of propaganda and lies, this year's finance bill does not have the burden of additional taxes as those who are lying to people out there that, oh, the finance bill has taxes on land. And I think now Kenyans have come to realize it is not true. In fact, one of those foolish people who was propagating that thing on social media, I saw him now change gears and start saying, oh, it is not in the finance bill. It was in a rating bill. There is no rating bill. It is now an act of parliament. And therefore, if anyone was paying taxes, you would already be paying it because it is already an act of parliament. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, I must encourage each one of us, and by each one of us, I mean ourselves here and the people we lead, the people of Kenya, that we must be aware that we are in very uncertain times, and therefore there are certain things that must change. And part of the things that must change is how we expend our resources. And I've listened to a few of the speakers here, and I don't know whether my good friend who was seated behind me has left. And when I listened to some contributions and I hear somebody saying, oh, borrowing is excessive now. And I looked at the figures in these books, and Honorable Atandi will bear me witness. If you look at the executive budget of about 2.817 trillion, recurrent expenditure, yes, high at about 1.9. Development budget at about 840 billion. If you go, Honorable Speaker, to look at the figure that is there for CFS, the Consolidated Fund Services, and this is where you look at debt, I would dare the person who tells us that this government has overborrowed to tell us whether the 1.501.3 trillion shillings that has gone into the Consolidated Fund Services, the bulk of which is interest on loans. And if you look at the figures, Honorable Speaker, domestic interest payments are at about almost a trillion, 986.7 billion. Foreign interest payments at about 267.5 billion. Pension salaries and allowances about 247 billion. So, Honorable Speaker, as a former chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, when I stand here today and I pretend that the government is overborrowing, this 987 billion and the 267 billion that is going into interest payment, I would dare any former chair of a Budget and Appropriations Committee, including myself, because I'm a former chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, to tell the people of Kenya, be honest as I am. Because when I was a chair Budget and Appropriations Committee in 2017, 2018, we borrowed and borrowed heavily. This is what we are paying for today. This is not only about Atandi and CS Mbadi who have borrowed this money that we are paying 1.2 trillion shillings on interest in the last 1 year, not even in the last 3 years. These are things we did over a decade plus ago, and we are paying for them now. But the fact that those who are in power today cannot run away from the responsibility of governing a nation and doing what must be done is to ensure, Honorable Speaker, that increasingly as these pressures continue to rise, we are also able to move away part of the expenditure that we were expending from the budget process to off-budget implementation, especially of development projects. And that is why, Honorable Speaker, in the wisdom of the President and the resilience of our nation and the commitment and the patriotism of many members of Parliament, we established the National Infrastructure Fund. That fund, Honorable Speaker, if you look at the figures today of 840 billion that we are able now to dedicate to development expenditure, we would not have been able to do that without NIF. And I dare say, Honorable Speaker, in the next 2-3 years, we will see this figure of 840 billion surpass $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion to $1.5 trillion being dedicated to development expenditure from the budget, because we are now able to lift off a number of the projects that would have been implemented through the budget, off budget, through the National Infrastructure Fund and through private public partnerships, Honorable Speaker. That is what we meant when we said that we will have innovative new ways of raising revenues, of ensuring that we're able to mobilize resources to be able to roll out our development agenda without necessarily overburdening the people of Kenya, either through additional taxation, like we are not doing today, or either through excessive borrowing, like was done over the last decade. And unashamedly, Honorable Speaker, I have watched none other than the former President Uhuru Kenyatta, attempt to lecture the people of Kenya or the leaders of Kenya. And you know, I looked at Uhuru and I wondered, where was this man living before? Where were you, Uhuru Kenyatta, when Kenyans were buying a packet of unga for 260 shillings?